In the fall of 2024, international media erupted with shocking news. Over 10,000 North Korean soldiers had been deployed to Russia. Leaked images through indirect channels revealed groups of uniformed North Korean troops marching through the freezing weather of Russia's Far East. Military experts speculated that this was merely the beginning of a much larger deployment plan, potentially involving up to 100,000 troops. The concerns for Ukraine weren't merely about the numbers, but also the reputation of North Korean soldiers for their endurance under extreme conditions. It was widely believed that North Korean troops were trained to bite the bullet through any challenge, ready to sacrifice themselves and exhibit absolute loyalty to their regime. With such characteristics, their involvement in active combat zones could spell significant trouble for Ukrainian forces. However, the events that unfolded deviated starkly from the narrative envisioned by both the Kremlin and Pyongyang. Rather than unleashing nightmares for Ukraine, the North Korean troops ended up shocking their Russian allies with a notorious friendly fire incident. The incident took place in Kursk Oblast, a western Russian region. This was not entirely unexpected, as the Kursk front had turned particularly intense since August, when Ukrainian forces crossed the border and seized nearly 500 square miles of Russian territory. This audacious move left Russia scrambling, forcing a strong counteroffensive in September. By late November, Russia claimed to have regained about 40% of the lost territory. But the cost in casualties and resources was steep. As the conflict escalated, North Korean troops, initially tasked with logistics, trench digging, and fortification building, were finally sent into the fray in this fiercely contested area. The world watched with anticipation, curious to see how these soldiers would perform in such a brutal war. Yet their debut turned out far less spectacular than expected. According to a report published on December 14, 2024, by Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, GR, via its official Telegram channel, a team of 20 to 25 North Korean soldiers stationed near the outskirts of Kursk were involved in a botched ambush. During the early hours, under the cover of darkness and amidst heavy shelling, they received a Russian warning about a potential Ukrainian convoy attempting an assault. Due to a language barrier, they only understood the key phrases, "shoot" and "eliminate." Consequently, they opened fire on an approaching armored convoy. Tragically, the convoy turned out to be part of the Akhmat Battalion, elite Chechen forces sent to reinforce the front. North Korean rifle and anti-tank missile fire ignited the lead vehicle, killing 4 Akhmat soldiers instantly, with another 4 perishing either while fleeing or from their injuries. Survivors, severely wounded, managed to report the catastrophic friendly fire incident to their superiors. To grasp the gravity of this error, one must understand who the Akhmat Battalion is. Known as Kadyrovites, they are among the most feared and ruthless forces in the Russian military, officially under Chechnya's command but deeply tied to Moscow. Renowned since the early days of the Ukraine conflict for their savage tactics, executing captives and committing atrocities, the Akhmat Battalion is synonymous with human rights abuses, both in Ukraine and at home in Chechnya. Externally, their brutality strikes terror. Internally, they are Putin's trusted enforcers, often called the Kremlin's personal guard, tasked with suppressing dissent and handling sensitive situations. Under orders from Ramzan Kadyrov, Chechnya's leader, they crush any opposition, even within Russian ranks. Throughout the Ukraine invasion, Akhmat forces spearheaded some of the bloodiest battles, leaving chilling accounts of their ruthless actions. Yet, these infamous warriors were felled by North Korean allies. They were told not to touch. The Ukrainian intelligence agency attributed the debacle to a straightforward issue, a language barrier. North Korean troops had minimal Russian language training, memorizing only a few dozen key phrases like fire or retreat. When alerted to an approaching convoy, they mistakenly assumed it was Ukrainian or at least a target for destruction. Reports suggested that Russian soldiers at another checkpoint shouted "Allies" in Russian, but it was futile. In the ensuing chaos, the North Koreans fired indiscriminately, leaving 8 Akhmat fighters dead. Some North Korean soldiers even delivered additional shots, mutilating the bodies of their unintended victims. By the time they realized their error, it was too late. Corpses lay scattered, curses filled the air, and nothing could be undone. After this incident, anger erupted within the ranks of the Russian military. In a leaked audio recording, an anonymous Russian soldier vented, "These damn guys," referring to the North Koreans, "know nothing. They'll shoot at dogs, cats, anything that moves." Another mocked them with prejudice, saying, "I told you, those Chinese," conflating North Koreans with Chinese, "are only good for parades. Now they're killing our Akhmat brothers." From the North Korean soldiers' perspective, confusion reigned as well. "We were just following orders. We saw unusual vehicle movement and opened fire." Some reports from Pyongyang subtly blamed Russia, suggesting insufficient translators were provided, only 1 per 30 soldiers, and often the translator wasn't present during critical moments. The fallout created a ticking time bomb of tension between Russian and North Korean troops. Russian soldiers scorned their Asian counterparts as mystical and useless, while North Koreans felt mistreated, insulted, and assigned to the most dangerous positions. They were also deeply offended at being mistaken for Chinese. The incident's impact was further compounded by the fact that Akhmat Kadyrov's golden child had been directly affected. With 8 Akhmat fighters killed in such a humiliating manner, retaliation seemed inevitable. Furious, Akhmat commanders reportedly threatened to take down any North Korean soldier who dared approach their controlled zones. Rumors swirled that Kadyrov himself was livid, calling senior Russian officials to demand punishment for the North Koreans. What was supposed to be a strategic deployment had become a public relations disaster for Russia. Instead of proving their worth as valuable reinforcements, North Korean soldiers earned the label of culprits. Public mockery followed. These were supposed to be elite reinforcements? Turns out, they're skilled at killing their own allies. When Russia advertised the deployment of the Storm Corps, many envisioned a highly trained, compact commando unit, akin to Britain's SAS or America's Navy SEALs. In reality, the Storm Corps consisted of 40,000, 80,000 personnel, divided into numerous subunits with widely varying levels of training. The name might sound formidable, but the actual quality was inconsistent. Modern warfare, as seen in Ukraine, relies heavily on advanced technology. Drones, long-range missiles, rocket artillery, and electronic warfare dominate the battlefield. Training in jungle combat or firewall jumping in North Korea does little to prepare troops for UAVs zipping overhead. The Storm Corps might excel in small-scale skirmishes or infiltration missions, but deploying them into the Kursk inferno, a battleground bombarded by artillery and missiles every minute, was an entirely different challenge. Even before sending North Korean troops to the front lines, Russia provided several weeks of familiarization with Soviet-Russian modern weaponry. However, the training period was too short for mastery. Some North Korean soldiers had never used modern assault rifles, only older models from decades past. Night vision devices and thermal scopes. Many didn't even know how to calibrate them. Language barriers exacerbated the problem. Russian instructors gesticulated wildly, shouting commands in Russian, while North Korean soldiers stared blankly, nodding just to avoid being yelled at, but understanding little. It wasn't just a matter of weapons, but also command and operational differences. North Korean military doctrine emphasizes top-down discipline. Orders are followed without question. In Ukraine's rapidly changing battlefield, flexibility, independent decision-making, and technological coordination are vital. The North Korean ethos of dying for the leader is powerless against drone swarms or heavy artillery barrages from miles away. Moreover, North Korea hadn't participated in large-scale warfare since the Korean War, 1950 to 1953. Their international deployments to countries like Egypt, Syria, or Uganda were limited in scope. Actual combat experience was virtually non-existent. Thrust into Europe's most intense conflict zone, they were akin to fish out of water. Therefore, it's not surprising that North Korean soldiers were initially assigned to tasks like digging trenches and building fortifications rather than taking up arms on the front lines. Russia played it smart, using them as essentially free labor to conserve the strength of its own troops. But as the fighting intensified, the North Koreans were pushed into gaps in the lines, sent into harm's way, and the inevitable happened. friendly fire incidents, and mounting casualties. The reality was stark. Most North Korean soldiers deployed to Kursk lacked the skills to serve as a true main force. They were more like an auxiliary army, enduring hardship but lacking the technical expertise for modern warfare. Despite the imposing name Storm Corps, only a fraction of their units were genuinely elite, while the majority were ordinary troops falsely branded as such for propaganda purposes. A year ago, Russia was already reeling from steadily rising casualty numbers. Despite their denials of tens of thousands of soldier deaths, the scale of their losses was undeniable. Domestic attempts to mobilize more troops met with resistance. Desperate for manpower, Moscow turned to North Korea, seeking to borrow its soldiers. This arrangement served dual purposes: deflecting Russian public scrutiny, "It's not our soldiers dying, it's the North Koreans," and bolstering battlefield numbers. For Pyongyang, it was a chance to exchange lives for political and economic gains. "You need troops? We'll provide. Just make sure we get something worthwhile in return." The geopolitical bargaining may have been complex, but on the ground, North Korean soldiers became expendable pawns. Due to language barriers and unfamiliarity with modern weapons, thousands of North Korean soldiers were relegated to dirty, labor-intensive tasks: digging trenches, building bunkers, carrying ammunition, and patrolling tunnels. They toiled in freezing conditions with meager benefits. Russia exploited the fact that these troops had no recourse for complaints, as North Korea enforces strict military discipline. When frontline gaps emerged, North Korean soldiers were still forced into action. Ultimately, their deaths were cheaper than those of Russian troops. Some Russian military officials bluntly stated, "Let the North Koreans charge first. If they die, it's no big deal, as long as our losses are minimized." This wasn't just cynical rhetoric, it was a grim reality. Reports from Ukraine indicated that North Korean units were often stationed at the most dangerous points, absorbing the initial barrage of enemy fire. Only days later would Russian units move in, once Ukrainian firepower had diminished. Unsurprisingly, North Korean casualty rates soared. To many Russian soldiers, North Koreans were nothing more than cannon fodder, tools to save Russian lives. To the North Korean government, their soldiers were merely instruments of service to the cause, with little regard for who lived or died. The shared goal: keeping Russia's war machine operational. It's easy to imagine the psychological state of these young North Korean men sent to Russia, a mix of confusion and fear. They were fed propaganda about great allies and defending socialism, only to face the freezing reality of Kursk. There, they were despised by their Russian counterparts, endured harsh conditions, encountered unfamiliar technology, and lived under the constant threat of death. Leaked reports from Ukraine's GUR intelligence agency suggested signs of psychological shock among many North Korean soldiers after just weeks on the front lines. When even their allies didn't see them as human, but as shields, internal fractures were inevitable. The Akhmat friendly fire incident was merely the tipping point, a symptom of deeper chaos where language and cultural barriers were just the surface. According to Ukraine and some Western intelligence channels, as of mid-December 2024, at least 200 North Korean soldiers had died in Kursk. This figure excluded those missing or gravely wounded who might not survive. Russia worked to suppress these numbers, wary of exposing the fate of their foreign forces. Some sources accused Russia of cremating North Korean bodies to erase evidence and save face for both nations. Ukrainian President Zelensky denounced such actions in a speech, calling it inhumane, burning faces to make them unrecognizable. While unconfirmed, Russia's secrecy made the grim possibility of brutal corpse disposal seem plausible. These brutal realities may have sown seeds of resentment among the North Korean troops. Was the Akhmat incident truly an accident, or could it have been deliberate retaliation? Do you believe this is a plausible scenario, or were the North Koreans simply incompetent? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The fallout from the Akhmat-friendly fire incident further deteriorated relations. The Kadyrovites were enraged, demanding revenge. Rumors spread that a group of Chechen soldiers had retaliated by attacking a North Korean camp, injuring many. While unverified, this atmosphere of hostility only fueled tensions, setting the stage for future accidents. Given Akhmat's status as one of Putin's most elite and loyal forces, any loss among their ranks was highly sensitive. The Kremlin found itself in a precarious position. It couldn't openly blame the North Koreans, as they were allies, yet it couldn't let the incident slide. Now they are scrambling to manage the crisis. The international community views North Korea's involvement in Russia's war with a mix of dread and condemnation. On one hand, there's concern that this could internationalize the conflict, dragging East Asia into a dangerous spiral. On the other, the Russia-North Korea alliance is seen as a dark deal, where North Korean lives are traded for whatever Pyongyang desires. The West has threatened to increase sanctions on North Korea, denouncing their involvement as a reckless move that fuels an unjust war. Kim Jong-un's regime, however, remains unfazed. Having long endured sanctions, additional sanctions make little difference. Still, North Korea's name is now tied to yet another bloody conflict, further tarnishing their already poor reputation. For the thousands of North Korean soldiers pouring into Kursk, the grim reality of dying for Russia persists. Russia shows no signs of halting its offensive, while Ukraine remains resolute in its resistance. As the war drags on, North Korean casualties mount. Amid the smoke and chaos, language barriers, and modern weaponry, these soldiers are reduced to insignificant pawns, crushed under the relentless machinery of war. Some analysts even warn of the seeds of desertion. In moments of panic and defeat, North Korean soldiers might abandon their posts, attempt to cross into Ukrainian-controlled areas, or even flee to European borders. Should this happen, it could trigger a new humanitarian crisis. Russia's deployment of North Korean troops to Ukraine appears, on the surface, to be a desperate gambit. Moscow seems to have bet on the idea that North Korea's rigid discipline and fanatical devotion would compensate for its shortcomings. Yet the Akhmat friendly fire incident has laid bare the alliance's fragile reality. Language barriers, inadequate training, and internal conflicts have rendered this partnership a mess. The sight of North Korean soldiers digging trenches and hauling ammunition, only to then mistakenly kill Russia's most feared fighters, highlights the absurd and perilous nature of this arrangement. Where's the much-hyped game changer? Instead, the North Koreans have embarrassed Russia while bearing the brunt of casualties in a war they were ill-prepared for. For North Korea, exporting soldiers to the battlefield might yield short-term gains, such as economic or technological agreements. But the image of a subservient army, killing allies by mistake, scorned and despised, and dying without recognition is anything but honorable. Rising death tolls, reports of body incinerations to conceal evidence, and a string of internal mishaps paint a picture of humiliation and tragedy. For Russia, using North Korean contract soldiers might temporarily ease domestic political pressure by reducing the visibility of Russian coffins returning home. However, in the long run, this strategy does little to change Moscow's disadvantage. Modern warfare demands not just manpower, but also skill, technology, equipment, and seamless coordination. With limited Russian language proficiency and minimal battlefield experience, North Korean soldiers have only added to the chaos on the front lines. What began as a promising force multiplier has become a stain on Russia's war effort. The friendly fire incident that claimed 8 Akhmat lives has turned into a symbol of failure, eliciting ridicule from Ukrainian and Western media. This is the elite force Russia boasted about, they sneered. They're great at killing their own allies. As casualties continue to climb, and North Korean soldiers are so devalued that their remains might be burned to erase evidence, the humiliation deepens. To die and not even be recorded, reduced to ashes and forgotten, is the ultimate insult. All of this serves Moscow's ambitions and Pyongyang's covert bargains, but at what cost? If the conflict stretches on, the current figure of 10,000 North Korean troops could grow to 50,000 or even 100,000, as rumors suggest. In such a scenario, the North Korean human wave may flood Kursk not to any strategic advantage, but to pile loss upon loss. Friendly fire incidents, internal strife, and mounting discontent within the alliance would only escalate. The relationship between Russia and North Korea would become increasingly strained, mired in calculations and grievances. In the darkest scenario, North Korean troops might revolt or fall victim to Ukraine's relentless UAV attacks. Ultimately, the price will be countless unacknowledged deaths, an endless tableau of shadow and tragedy. Russia's hasty move to bring North Korea into the Ukrainian battlefield has done little to address its core issues, lack of modern weaponry and coherent strategy, and instead has created a cascade of complications. Language and cultural barriers have fueled conflict between North Korean and Russian troops, culminating in the Akhmat friendly fire incident. North Korea's combat capabilities have proven inadequate for the demands of high-tech warfare, and their soldiers have been rapidly sacrificed as cannon fodder. Meanwhile, the international reputations of both Russia and North Korea have sunk further into infamy. Rather than making a difference, North Korea's debut in Kursk has only sown disgrace and humiliation. Putin and Kim Jong-un may still smile for the cameras, but behind closed doors, their soldiers' blood continues to spill meaninglessly on Russian soil, leaving no tangible gains, only more stains on an already horrifying conflict. Many have concluded they should have stayed out entirely. Instead, North Korea's involvement has resulted in catastrophic blunders, most notably the legendary friendly fire incident where 8 of Russia's most elite Akhmat soldiers were killed by their own allies. This tragic irony underscores how badly war strategies can falter when tied to unconventional alliances like Russia-North Korea. The world now watches Kursk with a mix of horror and derision. Could this be the worst partnership in history? Few, if any, would want to replicate this costly and chaotic experiment. The tales of friendly fire and cremated bodies serve as a grim reminder that war spares no one, especially when your ally turns out to be little more than a disposable pawn. What do you think about the North Korea-Russia alliance? What scenarios might unfold in the partnership between Putin and Kim Jong-un in the future? Share your thoughts and perspectives, as this war undoubtedly holds more brutal twists to come. The possibility of more friendly fire incidents looms large, escalating tensions to a boiling point and casting an even darker shadow over the entire region.